Are we live? No, I'm kidding. I'm the only one in the room. Today we're going to be looking at objections to the fine-tuning argument as promised in the previous video. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what the fine-tuning argument is, I've left a link to that video in the description, and you can check it out. You may already be familiar with it if you're familiar with standard apologetic arguments though, so in that case you probably don't need to watch that. You probably already know basically what that argument is outlining and what it's trying to demonstrate. So in today's video, we're going to cover some objections. We'll probably only have a chance to get through 3 or 4, and then we'll cover the remaining ones next time. And the first objection that we're going to talk about is the Anthropic principle. Now, basically, the way this works is that if you argued that fine-tuning seems to be evidence of God because of how delicately balanced the constants are, and you said basically that these conditions are so rare they point towards a designer, someone who endorses the Anthropic principle will come back and say, well, we shouldn't be surprised that life exists in conditions where life can exist. What would be surprising, Lawrence Krauss has said something to this effect, it would be more miraculous, in fact, if we existed in conditions where we couldn't exist or where we shouldn't exist. And I'm not particularly persuaded by this objection. There's lots of different analogies out there. A popular one is a firing squad, and basically you're asked to imagine that you have been sentenced to be executed by firing squad by 6 highly trained marksmen, and you're blindfolded, and they all say, ready, aim, fire, and then they shoot. But to your surprise, you remove your blindfold and find that you are still alive. You haven't been shot. Now, would it be more reasonable for you to conclude that the execution was rigged and that they actually didn't intend for you to die? Or would it be more reasonable for you to go, oh, well, I'd only be alive to observe that I hadn't been shot if all the bullets had missed, so there's nothing that needs explanation. You kind of see why this objection fails to hold up. And another analogy that Luke Barnes, the cosmologist, brought up was, imagine if you are a young student, like you're in kindergarten or first grade, and you go up to your teacher and you say, why do the stars shine at night? And your teacher comes back and says, well, that is a great question. You have such an inquisitive mind. They're trying to pander. And they say, the answer is because otherwise we couldn't see them. Now, would that actually explain why the stars shine? Of course it wouldn't. And in the same way, if I ask the question, why is the universe fine-tuned to allow for intelligent life? And someone says, well, otherwise we couldn't be here. In no way, shape, or form have they offered offered an explanation rather for why the universe's conditions or constants have the values they do that make intelligent life possible. So our second objection comes from Sean Carroll. I think he was the first person to raise this objection, maybe, at least the first person I saw. And he raised this objection in his debate with William Lane Craig. That's a very interesting debate from 2014. If you want to give that one a search on YouTube, pretty fun watch. And his objection is that God doesn't need to fine-tune anything. He's basically arguing, and I've seen other atheist YouTubers like Dark Matter 2525 and Anti-Citizen X use this argument as well. He's basically arguing that by virtue of God needing to fine-tune the universe, or by limiting himself to these particular values of the constants, that implies that he's not omnipotent and he's limited. First, I'd like to say, at best, this just gets you to a cosmic designer that's not all-powerful. But in that case, we should still not be atheists. And next, I would like to say that I think all you really have to do to poke holes in this one is present other possibilities for why God might have fine-tuned the universe other than a limitation. And if you can do that, then the person you're having this debate or discussion with, they would have to show that these possibilities are either, for whatever reason, far less likely than the possibility of God needing to fine-tune because he's limited, or they would need to show that they're impossibilities, or if they grant that they're just as valid and equally as possible as God fine-tuning because he's limited, then they can't definitively say God is not omnipotent because he fine-tuned. No one is saying he had to fine-tune either. So let's look at a couple of these possibilities. One possibility is that God fine-tuned the universe because he wanted people to have additional evidence of his existence. Maybe he doesn't want to be so abundantly evident to where belief in him is almost coercive, like him sitting on a throne somewhere in the Middle East, like inspiring philosophy has talked about. And so maybe this was just his attempt or his plan to provide additional evidence for his existence. That's a possibility. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, but I'm saying that's a possibility. The next possibility, and I find this one more interesting or persuasive, is that God fine-tuned the universe because it would be the peak of inefficiency and it would be completely unnecessary if God made all of the potential values that the constants could have held conducive to supporting life, or structure in general, right? Like planets and chemistry and stars. It would have been completely unnecessary for him to make all of those conducive for those kinds of results if he's only going to use one set of constants. As much as atheists like to talk about how inefficient God is because the universe is so big and we're so small by comparison, I think it would be very inefficient of God to have done what I just mentioned, to have made all possibilities conducive for the same result. And then you're kind of left with the question, like, so fine-tuning is not evidence for design apparently, and coarse tuning, or there being a wide range of values that could have permitted life, also wouldn't be evidence of design. So I think that objection also fails to hold up once closely examined. And then this third one that we're going to mention is the designer must be even more finely tuned than the universe. I heard Robert Kuhn, I hope I'm saying his name right, on the Closer to Truth YouTube channel when he was interviewing David Deutsch, I believe that's how you say his name, who is a physicist. This was an objection that David brought up, which is basically saying that the fine-tuning problem is kicked up a level, because if God explains the fine-tuning of the universe, then certainly God would have to be even more finely tuned. But I'm not so sure that this follows. All we're inferring or concluding from the fine-tuning argument is that there's an intelligent agent behind the creation of the universe. But other than that, it could have a whole number of other kinds of attributes that we can't deduce from just this argument alone. It could be triune, like the Christian God. It could be a single being, like the Islamic God. We don't know. We'll have to look further to see if any of those things can be picked up elsewhere. But fine-tuning to me seems to imply that it would have to be a very specific God, I guess is what he's getting at. Or he would have to be like a very precisely calculated being, and we could get into talks about divine simplicity. Is God made of parts, or is he not? But again, all we're inferring is that there was an intelligent agent. We're not saying it was specifically this kind of God. Multiple different possibilities could fulfill this role. In the same way that, a box of cereal on the second shelf in a grocery store aisle, if it was knocked over, there are lots of different candidates that could be responsible. We can reasonably infer that it was an agent, but we don't know based on this if it's a very specific person. If they're exactly 5'6" and they're African American and they're male and they were born between this set of years. So I don't feel like this objection holds up either. So we're at 11 minutes now. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. In the next video, we're going to cover more objections. We're going to look at the multiverse theory, and we're also going to look at this idea that it's arrogant to say that the universe is fine-tuned for life when life makes up such a small portion of all the things that exist in the universe. Until then, study hard and take it easy.